The restaurant was buzzing that Friday night. Chandeliers glowed, silverware clinked, and laughter filled the air. Couples leaned close over wine glasses, waiters glided between tables carrying steaming plates, and in the corner, a group of young professionals laughed a little louder than necessary. At the center of their mischief was Caleb Morris, a janitor in his mid-40s who worked at their office building. He was quiet, unassuming, and always kept to himself. Every morning he arrived early to mop the marble floors, polish the windows, and empty trash bins before the corporate employees even clocked in. But that anonymity made him an easy target. Some of the staff, especially the ambitious young executives, mocked him behind his back. They made jokes about his worn shoes, his plain lunches, and the fact that he never joined office conversations. To them, Caleb was invisible, or worse, disposable. So when one of them suggested setting him up on a blind date for fun, the idea spread like wildfire. They found a woman, Angela, a receptionist new to the company, and convinced her to go along with it. They told her it would be hilarious, that Caleb thought it was real, but really the entire group would sit at a nearby table watching and laughing. Angela hesitated, but peer pressure is strong. She reluctantly agreed, not knowing what she was truly walking into. Caleb, wearing his cleanest shirt, a white button-down that had been ironed with care, arrived nervously at the restaurant. His shoes were scuffed but polished as best he could manage. He clutched a small box of chocolates bought with part of his week's paycheck. He wasn't used to this kind of outing. He hadn't dated in years, not since his wife passed away. But when a coworker had suggested he give this blind date a chance, Caleb thought maybe it was time to step out of his lonely routine. Angela arrived a few minutes later. She was elegant in a navy dress, her hair carefully styled, though her eyes betrayed discomfort. When she spotted Caleb waiting by the hostess stand, her face faltered for a split second. She hadn't expected the janitor. Still, she smiled politely as he stood and offered her the chocolates. "For you," he said quietly. She murmured a thank you, trying to push down the guilt building in her chest. Across the room, the young executives leaned back in their chairs, snickering as they watched. Phones were already out, recording. At the table, Caleb tried his best to make conversation. He asked about Angela's interests, complimented her dress, and listened attentively as she spoke. He wasn't smooth or flashy, but he was genuine. Meanwhile, the nearby table grew louder. "Look at him trying so hard," one of the men whispered, his voice dripping with cruelty. "Does he really think this is a real date?" Another chuckled. A woman covered her mouth to hide her laughter as she filmed. Angela squirmed in her seat. She couldn't ignore the stifled giggles coming from the corner, and each laugh made her feel worse. Caleb noticed her unease and asked softly, "Are you all right? Did I say something wrong?" Her heart twisted. This wasn't his fault. He didn't deserve this. Then, just as the waiter arrived with their meals, the laughter from the corner table grew too loud to ignore. One of the executives finally stood, raising his glass mockingly. "To Caleb," he said loudly, drawing attention from nearby diners. "The janitor who finally found a date." The table erupted in laughter. Phones flashed. Other customers turned to watch. Caleb froze, his face draining of color. The restaurant fell into uneasy silence as people realized what was happening. Angela's cheeks burned red with shame. But before she could speak, another voice cut through the air. A firm, commanding voice that silenced the room. "Enough." Everyone turned toward the source. At the entrance of the restaurant stood Mr. Richard Hale, the CEO of the very company where they all worked. He had arrived unexpectedly for dinner with a client and had walked in just in time to witness the cruel spectacle. Mr. Hale was a man in his early 60s, tall with a sharp presence. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he carried an authority that required no introduction. The executives at the corner table immediately stiffened, their laughter evaporating. He walked slowly toward Caleb's table, his gaze never leaving the group that had instigated the humiliation. The restaurant was so silent that the sound of his footsteps seemed deafening. Standing beside Caleb, Mr. Hale placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder before addressing the room. "This man," he began, his voice steady but cold, "is not someone you mock. This man is the reason you walk into a clean building every morning. He takes pride in work that most of you would never lower yourselves to do. He is honest, dependable, and worthy of more respect than what I just witnessed here tonight." The executives at the corner table shrank in their seats. Phones that had been recording quickly disappeared under napkins. Mr. Hale continued, his voice growing firmer. "You think your titles make you superior? Let me tell you something. I'd rather have one Caleb in my company than 10 arrogant fools who mistake cruelty for humor." The room was frozen. Diners who had been eating paused, forks midway to their mouths as the CEO's words sank in. The laughter was gone. In its place was shame, heavy and suffocating. Caleb sat stunned, his eyes wide, his hand still clutching the box of chocolates he had offered earlier. Angela's eyes filled with tears, tears of guilt, but also admiration. One by one the executives mumbled excuses, shuffling out of the restaurant under the weight of their boss's disapproval. Not a single one dared to look at Caleb. When the last of them had left, Mr. Hale turned back to Caleb. His stern expression softened. "Don't let fools like them define your worth," he said quietly so only Caleb could hear. "You have more dignity in your little finger than they have in their whole bodies." Caleb swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He managed a quiet, "Thank you, sir." The restaurant slowly resumed its normal rhythm, though whispers still floated around the room. But now those whispers weren't mocking. They were words of admiration, for Caleb, for his composure, for the way justice had been served. Angela, her hands trembling slightly, looked across the table at him. I owe you an apology," she said softly. "I should never have agreed to this. You deserve better than what happened tonight." Caleb gave a small smile, though sadness lingered in his eyes. "It's all right," he replied. "Sometimes people forget kindness. But I appreciate your honesty now." They finished their meal in peace, the weight of humiliation replaced by something else, respect. And though Caleb left the restaurant quietly without fanfare, the memory of that night would ripple far beyond those walls. In the days that followed, the story spread across the office like wildfire. Everyone had heard about the blind date, the cruel prank, and most importantly, the CEO's public defense of the janitor. The young executives who orchestrated the joke were disciplined. Some faced demotions, others were asked to leave the company altogether. Mr. Hale made it clear, respect was not optional. As for Caleb, something changed. People began greeting him by name in the hallways. They stopped to thank him, to shake his hand, to acknowledge him as part of their workplace family. He remained humble, still doing his work with quiet dedication, but now he carried himself a little taller. And Angela? She sought forgiveness, not just with words but with actions. She invited Caleb for coffee one morning. No pranks, no peers watching, just two people talking. Over time, they built an unlikely friendship that reminded her of the power of humility and sincerity. Sometimes the cruelest jokes reveal the deepest truths. That night at the restaurant, Caleb walked in as a janitor and walked out as a symbol of dignity. It wasn't his title or his paycheck that defined him, it was his character. And when the CEO spoke, silence filled the room, because respect had finally been demanded. This story is a reminder: never underestimate the quiet people around you. Behind every uniform, every job title, every face you overlook, there's a story, a struggle, and a strength you might not see. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Kindness Stories. Every week, we share powerful, emotional, and inspiring